Hello everyone. In the previous video, we have talked about how can we make the main setting so you can log in using the Facebook social media in Android application. Now we are going to talk about how can we add the Facebook SDK library and how can we write the code using the Kotlin programming language. At first, here in this notepad, and I'm going to put all those info in the description of this video. At first, you should add this library, which is the com.facebook Android Facebook SDK. So just you can add it here to the build Gradle and paste it here, and of course click on sync now. Okay, then after we have added the library, we should go now here in the app, in the manifest, and open the Android manifest file. Here we should do two things. The first thing, to add the internet permission using uses permission for internet. Uses permission for internet. Okay, then the next step, when you add this library, which is the Facebook SDK, by default it comes with activity called Facebook activity, and this activity is used to ask the user about the username and password of the Facebook. So you should copy this activity and paste it here before the application clause, and also you should add this line to define your Facebook ID. As you remember in the previous video, we have added a Facebook ID using the developer.facebook.com, and we store it here in a variable called fpid. So here in the value, just write something like string fpid. So this line is used to define the Facebook ID, and those lines are used to define the activity, which is going to ask the user about the username and password. Now go to the XML of the activity, and here in the text we are going to remove the text view, and instead we can use something for Facebook called login button, and we can define it as wrap content for width and height, and the first important thing to add ID for it. So let's call it, for example, login underscore btn. So this login btn will be appeared here in the design. So when we go to the design, you will find small button. This button is the Facebook button, so we can give it some edges from horizontal and vertical way. Now the last thing is to write the code. So go to the Kotlin file, and at first let's define a variable, let's call it manager, from type callback manager. The callback manager is used, okay, to connect to the Facebook server to check your username and password. So it is responsible for the whole process of checking the username and password, and by default I'm going to put null for this object. Now after that, here and before the set content view, we can define the object, and at first Facebook SDK dot SDK initialized, and let's give it, for example, the context, which is the application context. Then we should create the object of the callback manager using manager equal to callback manager, which is the one used here for the Facebook. This is the callback manager of the Facebook. Okay, then we can add something like factory and create, factory dot create. But let's remove this Okay, now the first line has initialized and defined the SDK using this context of this activity, and then we have created the object manager of the callback manager, which is responsible to connect to the Facebook server and return the result back to the user. Now, what will happen if the user click on the login button which have drawn here in the XML file? So login button dot, and you should register it using the register callback. This register callback will ask about two things. The first thing is the callback manager, which is the manager variable, and then we should override some function for the Facebook callback, which is Facebook callback. And let's define the result for it, which is the login result. And here you should define the login result. Login and result. Now, after we have defined those things, now we can override here the function. So it is very simple to override the function. Just put the pointer here in the object, Alt Enter, implement member, and we should select those three functions and click on OK. As their names, the first function on success will be executed automatically if the login is correct, while the second one on cancel if the user cancel and didn't pass any username and password, and on error if there is any problem like the internet misconnection or something like that. So here on the success, for example, I'm going to put toast make text, for example, and let's pass the context, and for example, welcome. Okay, dot show, which means if the username and password is correct, just give it a toast or message box with a welcome. Of course, you can define intent to move the user to another screen if you want. And the last thing, how can we know what are the results which comes from the user? We can go here before the last curly bracket and call this overridden method, which is called on activity result, and just instead of using the super, you should use the manager and question mark, which means I'm going to use the manager to receive the result, which is defined here of the type callback manager. So here everything is ready to test. So let's test it. Okay, as you can see here, this is the login button. So when you click on this login button, it will start loading the activity to ask you about username and passwords. So everything is ready now to test. And see you in the next week, inshallah. See you next week.